I still remember that night like it happened yesterday, even though it's been almost 2 years now. I was living in a small one-bedroom apartment in the city, nothing fancy, but it was all mine. A sanctuary where I could truly be myself without judgment or explanation. It was the first place I'd lived on my own after graduating college, and I'd put a lot of effort into making it feel like home. Soft lighting, a few plants that somehow survived my inconsistent care, and photos of friends and family adorning the walls. I should probably tell you a bit about myself before diving into what happened. I'm Alex, 26 years old now, and I've been out as gay to my close friends and immediate family since I was 19. Coming out wasn't the dramatic event I'd built up in my head. My parents were supportive, if a bit confused at first, and most of my friends either already suspected or simply didn't care. The hardest part was actually telling my cousin Jake. Jake and I grew up together, almost like brothers. Our moms are sisters, and we lived just a few blocks apart our entire childhood. We shared everything: toys, secrets, dreams, and even clothes when we were the same size during middle school. He was my best friend, my confidant, and in many ways, the person I looked up to most. Athletic, charismatic, and effortlessly cool, Jake was everything I sometimes wished I could be. When I finally told him I was gay during our sophomore year of college, I was terrified of losing that connection. Jake was quiet for a long moment, then simply asked if this meant I'd be stealing his girlfriends. When I laughed and said that wasn't exactly how it worked, he just shrugged and said, "Well, you're still the same annoying cousin I've always had." And that was that. Our relationship didn't change, though I noticed he became somewhat of an unexpected ally, occasionally checking people who made homophobic comments when we were out together. Fast forward to that fateful weekend last summer. It was a Friday evening in July, and I had just gotten home from work, looking forward to a quiet weekend of Netflix and maybe catching up on some reading. I had ordered takeout and was settling in when my phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Hey cuz, my buddy Chris is in town for the weekend. His hotel reservation got messed up. Any chance we could crash at your place tonight? Promise we'll be out of your hair by tomorrow afternoon." I hesitated for just a moment. My apartment wasn't exactly spacious, but I had a comfortable couch and enough floor space in the living room for an air mattress if needed. Plus, I hadn't seen Jake in a few months, and I was curious about this friend of his I'd heard mentioned but never met. "Sure, no problem. I've got the couch and can dig out an air mattress. When are you guys coming by?" I replied, "You're the best. We'll be there in about an hour. Don't worry about the air mattress. We'll figure something out." Chris says thanks in advance. Little did I know that this casual exchange would lead to one of the most confusing and emotionally charged nights of my adult life. Jake and Chris arrived around 8 p.m., each carrying a small overnight bag and a six-pack of beer. Jake gave me a bear hug as he walked in, the familiar scent of his cologne bringing back memories of countless family gatherings and shared adventures. "Alex, this is Chris." "Chris, my cousin Alex," Jake said, stepping aside to reveal his friend. And that's when I first laid eyes on Chris. I'd like to say I didn't immediately notice how attractive he was, but that would be a lie. Tall, taller than both Jake and me, with broad shoulders and the kind of lean, athletic build that suggested he worked out regularly, but wasn't obsessive about it. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and his eyes were a striking shade of green that caught the light in my apartment entryway. He had a few days' worth of stubble that somehow made his jawline even more defined, and when he smiled and extended his hand to shake mine, I noticed a small dimple in his right cheek. "Thanks for letting us crash, man. Really appreciate it," Chris said, his voice deeper than I expected, with a slight accent I couldn't quite place. Southern maybe, but subtle. I managed to respond normally, I think, though I was suddenly very aware of the fact that I was wearing old sweatpants and a faded t-shirt with a hole near the collar. Not exactly the first impression I would have chosen to make. We spent the next few hours catching up and getting to know each other. Jake told stories about his job at the marketing firm, and Chris chimed in with anecdotes about their college days together. I learned that Chris was a physical therapist who had recently moved to a city about 3 hours away for a new job. He was in town for a conference that had ended that day, but his hotel had somehow double-booked his room for the final night. I told him it was fate. Jake laughed, taking a swig of his beer. I was already planning to visit Alex this weekend anyway. That was news to me, but I didn't mind. It was nice seeing Jake, and despite my initial attraction to Chris, I was enjoying the company and conversation. As the night wore on and the empty beer bottles accumulated, we ordered more food and switched to watching a basketball game on TV. I noticed Chris was easy to talk to, interested in my job as a graphic designer, asking thoughtful questions, and seeming genuinely engaged in our conversations during commercial breaks. There was no hint of discomfort or awkwardness when Jake casually mentioned something about my ex-boyfriend in passing, which I appreciated. Around midnight, Jake started yawning dramatically. "I'm beat, guys. Mind if I take the couch?" Before I could respond, Chris looked at me with those green eyes and asked, "Where should I set up?" "Floor okay." I hesitated. My apartment had limited space, just the living room, kitchen, bathroom, and my bedroom. The living room floor was hardwood with a small area rug that wouldn't provide much cushioning. "The floor's pretty uncomfortable," I said, thinking out loud. "I might have an air mattress somewhere. Let me check." After searching through my closet and storage spaces, I couldn't find the air mattress I thought I owned. I must have lent it to someone and never got it back. "Sorry, I guess I don't have it anymore," I said, returning to the living room where Jake was already making himself comfortable on the couch, shoes off, and using his jacket as a makeshift pillow. "Don't worry about it," Chris said with a shrug. "I've slept on worse." I looked at him, then at the hard floor, and made a split-second decision that I would replay in my mind countless times in the days to come. "My bed's pretty big," I offered, trying to sound casual. "King size. You can share if you want, better than the floor." There was a brief moment where nobody said anything, and I immediately regretted the offer. Of course, he wouldn't want to share a bed with me. What was I thinking? But then Chris just nodded and said, "That would be great, actually, if you're sure you don't mind." Jake raised an eyebrow but didn't comment, just mumbled something about turning off the TV soon and closed his eyes. And that's how I found myself leading my straight cousin's friend to my bedroom, suddenly very conscious of the fact that I hadn't changed my sheets in a week, and there were a few clothes scattered on the floor that I quickly scooped up and tossed into the hamper. "Bathroom's through there if you need it," I said, pointing to the ensuite. "I'll just, get changed." Chris thanked me and disappeared into the bathroom with his overnight bag. I quickly changed into the pajama pants and t-shirt I usually slept in, mentally kicking myself for not having something nicer or at least newer to wear. I heard the shower running briefly and used the time to straighten up the room a bit more, clearing some space on the nightstand on what would be his side of the bed. When Chris emerged from the bathroom, he was wearing just a pair of basketball shorts, his chest bare and still slightly damp from the shower. I tried not to stare, but it was difficult not to notice the definition in his shoulders and chest, or the trail of dark hair that disappeared into the waistband of his shorts. "Hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to his state of undress. "I usually sleep without a shirt. I can put one on if it makes you uncomfortable." No, it's fine," I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Whatever you normally do is fine." I slipped into the bathroom to brush my teeth and splash some cold water on my face, giving myself a stern look in the mirror. "Get it together, Alex," I whispered to my reflection. "He's straight. He's Jake's friend. This is just a practical sleeping arrangement." When I returned to the bedroom, Chris was already in bed, on the right side, scrolling through his phone. The soft glow illuminated his face in the otherwise dark room. I turned off the main light, leaving just the small lamp on my nightstand, and climbed into my side of the bed, maintaining what I hoped was a respectful distance. "Thanks again for this," Chris said, putting his phone down. "The conference has been great but exhausting, and the thought of sleeping on a hard floor wasn't exactly appealing." "No problem," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "Better than both of us having a bad night's sleep." We chatted for a while in the semi-darkness, keeping our voices low so as not to disturb Jake in the living room. Chris told me more about his work as a physical therapist, his passion for helping people recover from injuries evident in the way he spoke. I shared some stories about particularly challenging design projects and difficult clients, making him laugh with tales of ridiculous revision requests. It felt strangely intimate, lying there in the dark, voices hushed, sharing stories with someone who had been a stranger just hours before. I was acutely aware of his presence beside me, the slight dip in the mattress from his weight, the faint scent of my shampoo that he must have used in the shower, the occasional shift of his body as he adjusted his position. Eventually, our conversation dwindled, and Chris yawned widely. "I should probably get some sleep," he said. "Mind if I turn off the lamp?" Go ahead, I replied, and the room plunged into darkness save for the faint glow of streetlights filtering through my curtains. Good night, Alex, Chris murmured, his voice already heavy with approaching sleep. Good night, I whispered back, turning onto my side, facing away from him, trying to ignore the warmth radiating from his body just inches from mine. I lay awake for what felt like hours, listening to Chris's breathing as it slowed and deepened, indicating he had fallen asleep. My mind was racing, analyzing every interaction we'd had that evening, every smile, every laugh, every casual touch when we'd reached for the same slice of pizza or bumped shoulders on the couch. I knew I was reading too much into things, projecting my attraction onto innocent moments, but I couldn't help it. I must have eventually drifted off, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the soft light of early morning, and the realization that during the night, something had changed. Chris had rolled over in his sleep, and his arm was now draped across my waist, his chest pressed against my back, his breath warm against my neck. We were spooning, his body curled around mine in a way that felt both comforting and electrifying. I froze, unsure what to do. Should I move away? Pretend to still be asleep? Wake him up? Before I could decide, I felt him stir, his breathing pattern changing as he began to wake. There was a moment, just a brief moment, where he seemed to pull me closer, his arm tightening around my waist. Then, as consciousness fully returned to him, I felt his body tense. Slowly, carefully, he withdrew his arm and shifted away, creating distance between us. I continued to feign sleep, not ready to face the awkwardness of the situation. I heard him sigh softly. Then the mattress shifted as he got out of bed. The bathroom door closed quietly, and I finally opened my eyes, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding. What had just happened? Was the momentary tightening of his arm around me real, or had I imagined it? And what did it mean if it was real? I didn't have long to ponder these questions because the bathroom door opened again, and Chris emerged, now fully dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, his hair damp from another shower. "Morning," he said, his voice casual, giving no indication that anything unusual had occurred. "Hope I didn't wake you." "No, just woke up myself," I lied, sitting up and trying to act normal. "Sleep okay?" "Yeah, really well actually. Your bed is way more comfortable than that hotel mattress I had the last few nights." We made small talk as I got up and got dressed, neither of us mentioning the position we'd woken up in. I couldn't tell if he was genuinely unaware of how we'd been sleeping, or if he was choosing to ignore it to avoid embarrassment. When we emerged from the bedroom, we found Jake already awake, making coffee in the kitchen. Well, he said with a smirk. "Look who finally decided to join the land of the living." I glanced at the clock and was surprised to see it was already past 10 a.m. I rarely slept that late, even on weekends. "Coffee," Jake offered, holding up the pot. We both accepted gratefully, and the three of us spent the morning having breakfast and continuing the easy conversation from the night before. If Jake thought anything about Chris and me sharing a bed, he didn't mention it, though I caught him giving me a curious look once or twice when Chris wasn't looking. Around noon, as they were preparing to leave, Chris pulled me aside while Jake was in the bathroom. "Hey, I just wanted to say thanks again," he said, his voice lower than usual. "And, about this morning." My heart skipped a beat. So he had been aware of how we'd woken up. "Don't worry about it," I said quickly. "It happens." Chris looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. "Yeah," he finally said. "It happens." There was a pause, and then he added, "I'm going to be back in town in a couple of weeks for a follow-up conference. Maybe we could grab a drink or something." Before I could respond, Jake returned, and the moment was gone. They gathered their things, thanked me again for the hospitality, and then they were gone, leaving me alone in my apartment that suddenly felt emptier than before. I spent the rest of the day replaying every moment of the previous night and morning in my head, analyzing every word, every look, every touch. Was Chris just being friendly? Was the invitation for a drink just a polite gesture of thanks? Or was there something more to it? 2 weeks later, I got my answer when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Chris. Got your number from Jake. I'm back in town for that conference. Still up for that drink." And that, as they say, was just the beginning. But it's a story for another time, how my straight cousin's friend who chose my bed over the floor turned out to be not quite as straight as I'd assumed. How sometimes the most unexpected nights can lead to the most unexpected journeys. How sometimes, when someone chooses your bed over the floor without asking, they might be asking something else entirely. Let me just say this. 2 years later, Chris doesn't need to ask to sleep in my bed anymore. It's our bed now, in our apartment. And Jake? He was the best man at our wedding 6 months ago, wearing the biggest "I told you so" grin you've ever seen as he gave his speech about how he'd always known his two favorite people would hit it off. Sometimes the most meaningful connections come from the most awkward beginnings. And sometimes, when you offer someone a place to sleep, you end up offering them a place in your life instead. I'm just grateful that on that particular night, there wasn't an air mattress to be found anywhere in my apartment. Total _char_count, 17,832.